This podcast was created as a part of Podcast Lab by India Film Project in association with Anchor by Spotify.
Storytelling is at the heart of human existence. It's one of the pillars that give us meaning. Telling stories has been an important cultural aspect around the world for centuries. It captivates the miracle of our minds, being able to see the world as it isn't, being able to remember our past and imagine our future. It even has the power to bring us closer to each other. Stories help us transport, they also help us identify. Princeton's study on brain imaging actually shows how the more the listener understands, the closer the brain waves mirror that of the speaker. There's a Native American proverb that goes, "Tell me the facts and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever." And I think that's what stories do. They live in our hearts forever. The entire essence is the life of a single individual. The whole history and the future of the world ultimately comes together through the hidden source or the hidden story in one individual. So look back into the past and see what you remember of the people you loved, whether it was Martin Luther King's story that he had a dream and the impact that story had on movements across the world. Look at the communities that form today around movies, around shows. The power of the collective lies in the person telling the story. Storytelling means belonging, it means transcendence, it means purpose, it means meaning. And all stories are altered in telling, yet they continue to be told because stories have this birthing seed of renewal. It's like you meet again for the first time. So when people come out of storms, they won't be people that walked in, but that's what the storm is all about, right? That's what gives them the power. To meet someone as where they are today with all the effort they've put into themselves. The space where they can be them is where they are today, right? So if a person is doing the work, is transforming in their life, is vibrating higher, you no longer know them or their story. There's a power in words. There's a power in being able to explain yourself and articulate what you know and feel and believe and see the world and yourself the way you do. So I think just beneath everyone's surface, we're all living in another world and another world, the deeper you go. So find that world, own that story. I think that's what storytelling is all about.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. You just heard our guest for today, Akshat Rajan. Akshat is a storytelling coach and creative consultant. He has coached CEOs, creatives, and professors for speeches given at TED, TEDx, the United Nations, Forbes, and many more organizations. He is also working with his family group of construction and infrastructure companies, Gammon India, and is also an investor, writer, and influencer. This is a two-part conversation. On this episode, which is part 1, we'll be talking about Akshat's journey as a storytelling coach. He'll be sharing what a storytelling coach does, the processes he follows with people he coaches, his journey with TED, and much more. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I am so excited to have with me Akshat Rajan on the show this week. Welcome to the show, Akshat. So good to have you here.
So happy to be here, Sangeeta. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I think one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is because you do a really interesting job of being a storytelling coach. I know that's one of the many things that you do, which I was really curious about and intrigued by. And, just to kind of, I guess, start and, dive right in. How would you explain being a storytelling coach to someone? Because, it sounds very straightforward, but I feel like a lot of times people may not actually know what it is that a storytelling coach does. So could you tell us that?
Sure. I mean, that's the question I always get immediately after introducing myself. So in the simplest sentence, I help you figure out the story you're telling yourself about yourself. And then depending on what you're looking for, I help unravel why that's your story. I'll offer new ways to look at that story, and finally help you tell that story. So what's the best way to represent the truest version of yourself? And when people kind of go through that process, they come out feeling like the way they see the world makes sense to them a little bit more. When people listen to these people that are coached, they want to learn from them, they want to work with them. So that's the vibe.
That's actually really cool. And I don't know, would you say it's also, I guess, in a way, a bit cathartic and maybe even therapeutic for them and for you, in a sense, going through this process?
Oh, 100%. I think as a storytelling coach, I could care least about what the actual speak or talk is going to be, and most about what the process of getting there was. And I think that like tends to startle most people I work with, because they don't recognize that that was a process they have to go through, because they're so focused on getting that finished product. When I'm like, I'm actually not going to focus on the finished product at all. I'm going to ask you all of these questions that's going to make you just make the process of writing that product so easy that like you'll just know, and you'll be able to kind of be on stage and kind of just be able to share from a place that really comes from like that authenticity.
Wow, no, that's really cool. Can you take us through a process? Because I would imagine every person is different. So I'm assuming your processes would also be different depending on the person. But in general, is there like a specific, I don't know, method you follow approaching, people while trying to get them to tell their stories?
Sure. I think in the beginning, I go very macro.
Okay.
Because usually the talks are quite specific, or they're giving an interview about something they've done or something they've achieved. And so I'm like, before we get to that, let's figure out the person you were before this achievement or before milestone, right? Because I think that becomes important in the narrative, because obviously some shift has happened in order for them to be invited to speak somewhere, because most of the people that I work with are CEOs, are celebrities, are people who are being invited, who are being asked to share their story, right? So initially I go very macro. I do something called a life assessment survey. Okay. I kind of ask them to score their life and in different aspects. So if they feel like they've developed their spiritual potential, if they feel like they've been able to steward their resources, if they've and based on that, we kind of see the parts of their life that are their strengths, and the parts of their life that are their weaknesses. And from there, I have a few kind of people whose work I follow, some psychologists, and I introduce all of my clients to these processes. So I follow the work of Brene Brown, because I would say she's like a thought leader in vulnerability and courage and shame and in authenticity and trust. I expose my clients to her work. Similarly, there's another psychologist, Emily Esfahani Smith, who talks about meaning and the 4 pillars of meaning, out of which storytelling is actually one of them. So I take the speakers through kind of where they get meaning from in their life, because that's actually a huge part of their narrative, right? For some people, it's about the relationships around them. For some people, it's about the purpose or the career and the work they're doing. For some people, it's about spirituality and transcendence, or any form of transcendence, right? Dance, cooking, listening to music, anything that makes you forget time and space. And the last pillar is actually storytelling. It's the one that you actually have the most control over, but the one that you probably think about the least. And I think I want to be the person who like makes people realize that that's the pillar of meaning that like we need to be focusing more towards. And usually life stories go on for 5 to 6 hours. When I meet someone for the first time, it's from the minute they were born to all the big things they went through, to all the transformations they had, to all their key milestones. It's like a lifeline of sorts. And I think in that, as I'm listening, as I'm taking notes, as I'm recording, I'm understanding the story they've told themselves about their lives, or what brought them to be the person they are today. And once you have that, and once you've absorbed that truly as a coach, being able to walk into the lens of the client or of the person who's about to give the story is so easy, at least for me, after doing it so many times, that now I can see the world the way they see it, and I can like play around a little, like, and like change this string here and change that string there, and like help them connect a few events together. I look at stories as loops, and and I expose the clientele to like understand that process. And I'm like, look, there was this one thing that happened so many years ago. Do you think it's related to this one thing that happened last year? Wow. And do you think like that loop has closed, or do you think like the loop of a certain lesson in your life has closed? And if not, then why hasn't it closed? And I think as I've understood the story, it's like a form of narrative therapy. I'll go into like the parts that like pique my interest the most, or the parts where I feel there's more to tell, or there's more to explore. And once we've done that, I come to whatever they actually want to give the talk about, or whatever they are being invited to talk about. Because once I have that in my bank absorbed, I'm able to create the story around the actual thing based on that. Because I think all stories or all ideas that are worth spreading come from the journey of the person who's been behind that idea, or who's come to that idea. A big part of it after becomes writing that story, right? And putting it on paper, rethinking about the sentences and being like, is every sentence coming out in the way we want it to come out? Is every sentence intentional with who we are? So then it becomes a little bit more nitty gritty and more about what has come out of the process.
Oh, that's incredible. And that sounds like such a fulfilling process almost, because I feel like with each person you work, it's almost as if like, I don't know, I guess it's like the concept of a human library, right? Where you're almost like really getting to know them as, stories themselves, and kind of figuring out, okay, what is it that we can present about you that would, make the most impact, and that would really send out your true essence in a way, which I think is really cool. And I'm trying to attempt something similar with this podcast. So I get the excitement of doing it completely, which I think is really cool. But, having said that, since you've worked with so many people, then I wonder, and, obviously you've done this over a period of time, which is why now I would assume there is a certain system in place, and you know the beats around it, and, how to kind of, I guess, deal with different types of, people you're coaching. But, just starting out, and I guess maybe even somewhere along the way, and maybe even today, are there moments where you feel like this is a lot of, energy or intensity to take from someone? And have there ever been, times where you feel like maybe there's something that's triggered you, or, sort of affected you in a way by what someone is saying? Because, because even in, say a TED talk or, other conversations, there can be really triggering topics sometimes people talk about. So as a coach, have you ever faced an issue where something's triggered you and you're just like, okay, how do I deal with this? Because this is triggering me as well. How do I kind of, deal with this for my own, mental health, so to speak, but also present it in a way that's not as, I guess, shocking or, triggering for someone else?
Oh, 100%. I think I've been constantly exposed to types of people I haven't met before, to types of situations I haven't been a part of, to types of things that have exactly been my journey. I feel like there are a lot of people who've come my way more for me than for themselves.
Okay.
That makes sense. I'm like, and I think it's all about kind of figuring out that balance, because you're right. There was a time where I was coaching, say, 10 to 12 people at a time, and I felt like it was extremely draining because that code switching between people, like I said, like I like to immerse myself in someone else's story when I'm working with them. And I don't think it's easy to do that when you're working with a lot of people at a time. And so I have definitely put a limit on the number of people I work with at one time.
Okay.
Because this is also something, like I would be lying if I said that this part of my career is not a selfish part of my career, because I think that every time I get to immerse myself in someone else's story, it's such a cathartic experience for me also, because I'm getting to see the lens in which someone else sees the world. And I have the benefit of being able to culminate all of those lenses. But I don't think that culmination would happen if I didn't immerse myself. So I think boundaries between to take care of yourself, to make sure your mental health isn't being affected as you're coaching people, are immensely important, and something I learned along the way. And I also realized that I got a lot more out of a process when it was just 2 or 3 people at a time rather than multiple people at a time, and I was able to kind of, I think there is definitely a level of empathy or active listening that after a certain point gets saturated or gets exhausted. And so in order to kind of give the people I'm working with the type of empathy I want to give them, the type of active listening I want to give them, the space for me to be able to hold that space, because I always see that being in this space and helping people become better versions of themselves means that I always have to be the best version of me. Right? Or I also have to keep doing that work to be the best version of me. And so I'm like, always like, I constantly am looking for coaches. I constantly am looking for therapists, because it's like, as a coach or as someone who's helping people therapeutically, if I don't have those outlets for myself, then I'm not being, like, who am I for them to come to,
Yeah. No, that's really cool to hear about, because this is something like I wonder, because since you're working so closely with people and, kind of managing that whole energy balance in a way of like, okay, I'm still myself, they're this person, this is the divide, this is the boundary, and we're still going to do this. So I think it's really interesting to kind of, hear about that. But also, then coming into, I guess, the beginning of it all, when did you decide that you wanted to become a storytelling coach? Because it's not the most conventional career choice for a lot of people. So, what kind of, I guess, inspired you to, take that decision and be like, hey, this is something I want to do?
I didn't decide.
Oh, okay.
It's a funny story, because I started off really young, and what I was interested in was having platforms for people to learn from each other, and it started when I was organizing a TEDx event in my high school. Okay. So my friend and I were the world's youngest TEDx organizers at the time. We were only 13.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And I guess we would just watch we watched a bunch of TED Talks, and we were like, we learned more from that than we have from most of our classes. So why aren't we listening to more of these? Or like, why aren't we having this as part of our education? So I think it came from there. But when we were like, let's put this talk show together and let's get really cool people to like teach the audience, it became about the show as a whole initially, and about like, oh, if I can expose a person to one type of person, second type of person, third type of person, fourth type of person, then the audience's mind just like will expand by the end of it. And like, that's the expansion we need in this world. And that's real education. It comes from experience. So we got like this Bible from TED to like have these events. We got a license from them in order to have it. And so like X in TEDx is like independently organized TED event, right? So yeah, so it means that you have a license from TED to have it, to have the event in their name, but you have to follow like a 300-page rule book, and you are like audited, and like there's like a mentor and there's an ambassador, and they have to make sure your event followed all the rules in order for you to get a license again the second year around. So I guess it started there. I think that in the process of putting that show together, the part that excited me the most was when I sat with all the speakers one-on-one, and we're like, what are we going to talk about? Like, how are we going to make sure that this is a TED Talk and not like a boring lecture? So after doing TEDx in my high school, I got recruited to do TEDx Gateway, which is basically TEDx Mumbai, and it's one of the largest TEDx's in the world. It's the largest in Asia, and that was the coolest experience, because there the teams were so much bigger that I wasn't looking at the macro stuff as much. I was actually next to other professional speaker coaches, and I didn't even know that was a profession. And they would sit alongside people like Shashi Tharoor and Sheila Dikshit and all of these like Indian storytellers, speech givers who a lot of people are inspired by. And I would be sitting in the back of the room, seeing how they kind of coached them, or how they got them to get their idea out, or how they walked them through getting to something new, because all of these people are seasoned speakers. They don't if you tell them they're being coached, they'll be like, I don't need a coach. But
I will coach you. That's what they will say.
Exactly. But I think you have to go like, it's a discussion, like, we figure it out together. We want you to be the best, and that's why we're here. And you kind of have to go from that part or that lens. And then post that, I went to college and I became the curator of the TEDx at my university for 4 years. I attended the Real TED conference. I met a lot of real TED speakers, and a lot of the, with TEDx, there are many TEDx events in the world, 10,000 perhaps. And there are so many talks that they produce every year. But the dream of every TEDxer is that my TEDx talk at my local event will get selected to be a TED talk on the TED website.
Right.
And that's what TED does. They go through all of these thousands of talks every year, but they pick around only like 250 per year to become a TED talk. And the TEDx YouTube channel probably has like millions of views, but everyone knows the TED YouTube channel or the TED.com has billions of views, literally.
Yeah.
So for a talk to like show up on that website and like every time a new talk is added, it's on the homepage, it goes out on email, stuff like that. Automatically, it becomes exponential, and that actually finally happened in college when 2 of the talks I coached ended up becoming actual TED talks.
Oh, wow. Which ones were those, if I may ask?
Yeah, so both were professors at Tufts that I was working with. Yeah, they were both quite sciencey talks, which is something usually I'm like not a strong like field for me. But at the same time, I think the reason they both worked is because of our collaboration and because of the fact that I was able to kind of bring the creativity to an otherwise very boring science lecture, and and I think both the professors recognize that, because I think the one of them was about floppy fish. Like the professor was doing research on like the floppiness of a fish and like how it affects their movement, which was very cool, right? Because he would study eels and how eels move versus how other fish move, and how there's like a fluidity in eels that the other fish don't have, and like what those muscles mean, and how if machines were able to mimic that fluidity today, if we understood that fluidity in fish and machines were able to mimic that, robots were able to mimic that, if we were able to create that in a lab, then we would be able to we would be at like the precipice of the next kind of frontier in technology, because motors and the way things move would become so much more intuitive or become so much more sensitive, and that would make leaps. So he would actually he had a whole lab set up at my university where he would conduct these research on these fish and kind of see how they could be used in like industrial and like more like products around the world. So that was one of them. And then the other one was Lara Durgovich. She was talking about evolutionary medicine again, which you would think like is a boring topic, but she essentially talks about evolution and how it's all about compromise. And how knowing your genes and knowing your all of the little details of your genes is very important. So she picked like it was almost like she picked her partner depending on like his genetic makeup and hers. Or like it was an important factor for her to think about the genetic makeup, because in order for evolution to happen, like it's like a disservice to evolution to like have the wrong people come together, and so she would do research in that field. And so when she found like it like related to her personal journey of finding a partner, and like how his gene and her gene, which was a specific Jewish gene, came together, and like how it worked out for her because the genes made sense also. And it was just a unique look at evolution and evolutionary medicine and the way genes play a role. But yeah, long story short, I think while working with people, I got my favorite part was that one-on-one, and I got like this front row seat of like doctors, filmmakers, CEOs, clowns, hackers, dancers, all types of people, and like the way they make sense of the world around them and their place in it.
Oh, that's That's really cool, and what a journey you've had, from there to here, which is incredible because you've worked with, speakers, not just from TEDx, but also even schools, colleges, but even like Forbes, United Nations, the Young Presidents Organization, which are, like you said, they're really like big personalities as well over there. Then, which kind of leads me to wonder, have you ever been intimidated or starstruck by any of your mentees, I guess?
That's funny because, of course, there have been people that like I'm a bit nervous about because they have that much more influence or they're naturally such good storytellers. So I'm thinking about like, oh my God, how much more value am I going to be able to add? But I think that's where that process comes in again, because as soon as they become human to me by me hearing their journey, they no longer are to me like what the rest of the world sees them as. My whole intention is always to see them as who they are and who they're showing themselves to me to be. And I think the minute, yeah, sure, maybe I feel like in my first meeting with them, but like the minute I have gone through them telling me their story, I think they and me, we both feel so comfortable with each other instantly. And then I'm losing all the other labels they have, because for them, then they're just a human being who has a story. And I'm like, now let's see what this story could mean for all the people that you're going to influence or all the people that are around you. And if you don't know your story, then how are other people going to learn from your story? And how are you going to be able to scale yourself without other people learning from that story? So yeah, I think that shift into the UN and YPO and Forbes kind of just happened very naturally, because after I did this, like people would just like, there was like a word of mouth situation that like, oh, he helps people, or like people I'd worked with asked me to come work with them again when like they were giving another talk, because usually these platforms don't provide speaker coaches to these people, So if someone who is going to get an opportunity to speak on a platform like that feels like, why should they waste it? So they started seeking me out and going like, oh, can you help? And then I was just like, wow, I'm just like constantly helping people. I should just make this a profession, or like make this like literally one day someone called me and was like, oh, do you charge for it? And I was like, yeah, I do. And I didn't before, but then it just kind of became something that like, okay, if I'm going to continue spending my time to do this beyond the college and beyond this thing, this has to be something that like I have to like, formalize. And I didn't want to, like, until today, I don't like advertise it, or I don't have like a website where someone can go like, oh, I want to start coaching with you, or I don't really reveal who I work with to most people, because touch wood, it's just been working through word of mouth. And in a way, I've been coming across people that are different and like, because I think that's something that's super exciting for me, like working with someone whose story I haven't dealt with before, because that's the selfish part, where I'm like, if I work like to be honest, I've done some work with control and with CEOs a bunch of times, and they all have the same issues, and I'm like, after a point, I'm like, I'm bored.
This isn't working for me anymore. What else can I, talk about?
I'm like, I don't want to deal with control issues. So when someone tells me I have control issues, I'm like, I've dealt with that enough.
Been there, done that.
I want to deal with someone who is dealing with something else, because that variety, I think, keeps me motivated or keeps me excited to help, and gives me that feeling that like, oh, there's one more story to learn from for myself.
No, but yeah, that's amazing. And then, like, what makes a good storyteller for you, considering you've worked with so many people, you've seen so many people speak about their life stories, or, whatever it is that they're talking about. So then what for you makes a good storyteller?
I think there's a bunch of things, but all of them are very small things. And I'll kind of take you through a few of them, because I think like the baseline, one thing that everyone has in common is that all of these people have a great relationship with themselves.
Okay.
And I think I get a front row seat to see that relationship, because I'm watching them talk about themselves, or watching them see how they talk to themselves, right? Like if someone like saying like, oh, then I said, oh, I was stupid and I did this, I'm like, okay, this person isn't being generous towards themselves, or this person's looking at themselves in a way that they perhaps shouldn't. And I think when someone is cognizant of that, when someone realizes, because today, if someone else came to you and said like, I'm going through this, you're not going to tell them they're stupid. You're going to be like, it's okay, it worked. But you don't use the same language you use with others, with yourself.
That's true.
And so that's the scary part, or that's the part where I feel like I have to like be actively listening to see the way in which they talk to themselves. Because when they're telling me their story, I can tell why they're taking decisions, or like what's that like fuzzy part between saying yes and between saying no. And that's where you kind of get like the gold of like, okay, this person talks to themselves in this way, and this is what we need to work on. But most people who are sharing stories, who are storytellers, who are able to inspire others, have that sorted out. They do have that great relationship with themselves, and they build on things that they were curious about. And so when they've kind of given time and space for things they were curious about to come out of them, it naturally makes someone else feel like, wow, this person's really thought about this, or wow, this person's really been through this. And I think I would say that a good storyteller understands that meaning that something holds in their life in ways others don't. I think they come from a place of why. Simon Sinek always says in the Passion Circle, if you've heard of it, like you have to start or come from a place of why. That's the core of your being. You can't say I'm a storytelling coach. It has to be, I want to move people. Like the fact that you're a storytelling coach is irrelevant, but the fact that you want to help people grow, or the fact that you want to move people is the core, or is the why you do what you do. And a lot of good storytellers know their why, and they've sat and done the work to kind of figure that out and live that. So that's another thing that I think good storytellers have. Another one would be transcendence, like I was talking about before. I think all good storytellers, even though they are attached to the story, they also understand detachment and dispassion as well. They have spaces in their life for transcendence. They have whatever that may be. For someone it's dance, for someone it's cooking, for someone it's meditation and spirituality, for someone it's religion and praying, for someone it's going cycling. But like they all have a way to disconnect, a way to see time and space as it isn't, because it's only when you do that and you come back to your story, or you come back to your idea, you're able to see it yourself with a new perspective, or you're able to see it for yourself from a clearer or a more wise space, or a more heart and soul kind of way of looking at it. So I think those are a few things. I think in general, like you'll see these opposite values come up in storytelling, and I think a good storyteller knows the center is the way, or knows that like in order to like achieve a sense of wholeness or achieve that sense of loop, you have to be able to integrate the contraries, because stories usually have this oscillation between one extreme and the other, and the story ends in like you finding that balance, or you finding that center, you seeing all the hardships, or you seeing all the good stuff, and then coming to the middle of it. So I think all of these like little things put together are what makes a good storyteller.
No, and very relevant. And I think, really relevant and really, good points, honestly, because, when you were talking about it, I was just thinking about, storytellers and stories that have like stuck with me. And I feel like you're right. Most times it is the stories where it's by people who truly understand themselves and have really taken the time and effort to reflect and process their journeys and be like, okay, this is what I went through. I got through it. This is what I learned from it. This is what I'm taking from it. This is how I'm coming out now. And, walking the path that I'm walking. So I completely resonate. And in fact, this kind of segues into another question I had, because there's this one TED talk which really inspired me, like back in 2015 or 16, because I resonated so much with it. It was by Emily Wapnick, and she spoke about multipotentialites. So a multipotential, for listeners who may not be aware, a multipotentialite is basically someone who's interested in more than one or two things, who has like various interests. And a lot of times these people don't even really have a fixed career, or are not happy with a fixed career path. And there have been cases of people who are considered multipotentialites who kind of combine their varied interests and, try to make careers for themselves. So having said that, I would say you are a multipotentialite, Akshat, because, you are a writer, storyteller, a storytelling coach, but you're also an investor, you're in real estate, project management, you're doing a bunch of things that sort of make you. It's not just one or two things. It's a combination of things that I'm assuming that you really enjoy and believe in, and hence you're kind of really creating your own path and niche. Having said that, what has your own journey with identity been like? Has there ever been, I don't know, I guess, conflict or confusion about identity? Because, I feel like the world is constantly trying to push people in terms of, you're in this box, this is the label you're going to be attached to. So what has your own journey been like with, identity and I guess figuring yourself out and being like, hey, these are the things I want to do. I don't care what people have to say or whatever.
So that was part 1 of my conversation with Akshat Rajan. That was really interesting, and I learned a lot about what a storytelling coach does. You can tune in to part 2 of my conversation with Akshat, where we talk about his creative inspirations, his relationship with social media, and some fun projects he's working on. Talk soon!